Alright, welcome back everyone. My name is Daniel, and today I wanted to explore this enigmatic topic that has made many appearances during these teleconferences, our sessions together, and that is the concept we call self-love. Now, we've explored the benefits of self-love in many of the sessions we've done together. And I thought I'd do a quick recap before we go into a little bit more detail, a little bit more exploration. So in essence, self-love is this magic key that unlocks infinity, to put it short and simply. When we're holding a space of self-love, the intellect that, for many of us, has been blocking our true skill, our true nature, and our true potential dissolves into the background. And what becomes, or what moves to the fore, is that higher consciousness, that higher self, which is limitless intelligence, limitless energy, limitless skill, limitless talent. So the more we've nurtured and cultivated intellect as opposed to our true self, the more we have actually become stagnant and finite. And the ego has really painted it the other way, so we've become a society conditioned to grow and nurture the intellect. And that's been the ego's biggest trick. But what we have available to us, what we can access, is a deeper reservoir of intelligence and skill and creativity. And that comes from holding a space of self-love. Whereas nurturing the intellect, for most of us, has really come from a space of, I'm not enough who I am, I need to add more to myself in order to get somewhere in life, in order to be someone, in order to compete, in order to achieve, I need to add on top of myself. Whereas that is this false economy, and it's not grounded in any deep truth. When the ultimate reality is I am already perfect, I'm already all-knowing. And the access to that, of course, is the opposite of self-doubt. So self-love is the access to universal intelligence. And it's the access to everything else in life flourishing and thriving. Relationships, parenting, finances, you name it, self-love, making decisions from self-love is going to blossom in all areas. But how do we access self-love when so many of us have been taught and told since we were very young that who we are isn't enough, we're not good enough, we're not getting a parent's approval, we don't measure up in society, or we don't compare or compete with friends and neighbours and siblings. So when we have these notions instilled in us that who we are is inherently flawed, how do we come back from that to reach a place where there is a space of self-love? And that has been one of the hardest challenges for humanity. And you just have to look around and you can see how few are accessing that. And you can see how many are still compensating for these feelings of inadequacy. I'm not enough, I'm not respected, I need to achieve more, I've got to keep up with the Joneses. And now we've got that playing out even in the spiritual or enlightenment circles where we're not enlightened enough now, or we're not enlightened as we should be, or as our friend, as our neighbour, and we don't know all the lingo, we can't talk the talk as much as somebody we know. So the ego has gone, great, even though you're wanting to move out of the ego into the higher consciousness, I can still work within that realm and find a way to hold everyone back. And so the ego uses some really key powerful tools, which we're going to look at in a second. So these tools that the ego harnesses keeps us out of self-love. So let's look at what really is the access to that space. The first thing that we need to realize is that self-love is inherently present, ever present. And the only thing that prevents us from realizing it and experiencing it and even embellishing it is that we never knew that. We don't believe that. And we don't believe we're worthy of that. So it's this notion of I'm not worthy of self-love that actually prevents the experience of it from blossoming and becoming our day-to-day reality. So it's like we're seeking permission to love ourselves. Yet, each one of us has a list as long as our arm as to why we won't give ourselves that permission. And some of those reasons include past failures, past decisions, hurting people, not trusting life. All these encounters and experiences we've had in the past that have not really gone the way we'd hoped. So then there's the current side of things, the current imperfections, or I'm overweight, or I've aged, or I'm not as attractive as Angelina Jolie. There's all these external benchmarks giving us permission or not to have self-love in various areas. How do we compare? How do we compete out there in the world? Are we tracking okay? Are we tracking okay compared to our brother, our sister, our next door neighbor, our parent? Are we getting other people's approval? So we have all these criteria that really came from when we were a young child, trying to get mum and dad's love and approval and respect. We're still carrying a lot of that with us. So what we're really trying to do is not really get mum and dad's approval anymore. Not that we ever really were, it's how it really seemed in that moment. And for many young kids that's definitely present. But as we're evolving, what we're really seeking is our own approval, our own love. And so there's only a very small obstacle, a very tiny hurdle. And that's really, are you going to give yourself permission to love yourself or not? And that's what accessing self-love is all about. So how do we go about then getting that permission? How do we allow that reservoir to keep flowing, or to start flowing and to keep flowing? Because there's a lot of habits that can really get in the way of this happening. So the more we can kind of knock out some of these habits, the more we can cultivate that space of self-love. So let's look at some of these habits, and you'll see a beautiful overlap between these habits and the tools of the ego. One of the first habits that keeps us deficient in the self-love department is this self-punishment, beating ourselves up, condemning ourselves, kicking ourselves when we're down. That's really been bred within society, that for somehow if you punish somebody, that's going to make them better, smarter, greater, more connected. That's not actually the truth, and we are the embodiment of that. If we're not feeling that self-love now, then clearly something didn't work. So the notion of wanting to punch ourselves in order to rise up, well, we need to really see through that. And let's look at the truth of that. And whenever we bring truth, as we know now, we shine the light of truth, we get clarity. So let's bring some truth into that. Well, what happens is, when we beat ourselves up, we bring ourselves into a very low frequency of thinking, of thoughts. And when we're in that downward spiral, we keep attracting other thoughts that match that beating up. I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough. We just keep bringing in those thoughts, and we bring in energetic attacks that match that as well. So when we beat ourselves, pummels, we're on the ground, and anything that is ground dwelling, a low level frequency, comes straight in. We just bring it in. So it becomes much harder to triumph than where we were before. So failure is one thing, but to then punish just takes us down even lower. So the truth behind all of this is there's only really one way to elevate and transcend that state of mind that created that initial problem, and that is self-loving thoughts. So this misnomer of, if I punish myself and hard on myself, that will elevate me, well, we need to throw that out. That's very old notion. So whenever you're feeling discontent, frustrated, upset, resentful over something you have done, just start bringing it into your awareness, bringing it into being a habit, knowing that if I punish myself, I'm only going to sink further. But if I praise myself for having the courage to have gone through that, to still be alive despite all the hurdles that you've experienced, to still have the persistence to move through, find something that you can really acknowledge yourself for. That will help you ascend. Now, often it can be hard for us to see our own greatness in those moments of frustration. And this is where Module 1 comes into play. Connecting to your higher self, your true self, will give you instant reason as to why you can love yourself despite having failed, hurt somebody, injured yourself, whatever it might be. So it's really pivotal that truth is accessible, because truth and self-love go hand in hand. They're two sides of the same coin. So the more we are accessing truth in the space of doubt and frustration, the more that doubt and frustration is cleared rapidly. And it's one of the things we teach in the self-mastery program, is being able to see in that moment what is truth or what is non-truth. And it's a very quick way to ascend that. So some of the other habits that we have that really deprive us of the self-love space is this, one of the ego's greatest mechanisms, and it's called comparison. Now, comparison thrives, allows the identity to thrive, because when we look outside of ourselves, the ego is very powerful at finding things that are demoralizing, that have us feel inadequate, not moving forward fast enough, not looking the right way, not having enough money. The ego is going to find ways to bring you down, or even go the opposite, to give you a superiority complex. Either a superiority complex or the inferiority complex are both tools of the ego. They're both keeping you in non-truth. The inferiority complex is stopping you from moving forward and being great, and the superiority complex is starving you of true love, and love from others creates a disconnect, a separation. And that arrogance creates a complete disconnect from universal intelligence, which is the ultimate all-knowing intelligence. So either one is a tool of the ego that is designed to hold us back. So comparison is, again, something that requires, I want to say, the discipline, but it's more a knowing. If you know cigarettes are bad for you, you know copious amounts of alcohol or drugs, you know that's bad for you. But we need to bring it into our awareness that comparison is just as bad, and even worse, because it actually creates an onset of all these emotional spaces, depression spaces, hopelessness spaces, and suicidal spaces, or the opposite, over-ambition, the need to overwork and burn yourself out. So, and then that brings in drugs and alcohol and creates all these other symptoms in your life. So comparison needs to be up there with taking rat poison. The more you can integrate that comparison is lethal, and it's going to really shorten your lifespan and affect the quality of your life, the sooner you'll stop doing it. Because comparison is ego, and ego is self-doubt. So we're coming from, I don't think I'm good enough, or I think I'm better than everyone else, so I'm going to look over there. I'm going to read the latest magazine. I'm going to check out all these websites. I'm going to check out the news and all these gossip things, and I'm going to talk to people in my family and just see how they're going so I can feel better for myself and ultimately feel worse in many cases. Because ego will twist it around eventually. So the avoidance of forms of comparison is going to create that enlightenment, that connection so much faster. And that's why when you look at, Tibetan monks and these people are living on mountaintops. They're not coming down, spending their awakening in Beverly Hills. They're not going to the highest concentration of ego, of comparison, of ego activation, because they know that's the slow route, the hard route. What they're dealing with is the awakening is, well, put yourself in a place where your ego isn't going to constantly be triggered all day long. And some of us, we can be in egocentric places and not get fully triggered, but there are those of us who are sensitive to that, and we can be activated, and we find ourselves being thrown into our ego more often than not. So just as if, the same way we're not going to eat foods or drugs or all these things that are toxic, well then stay away from ego fodder, because that's toxic, more so in many cases. So there are a couple of habits that humanity has developed, or the ego has really cultivated in us, to starve us from self-love. Because the ego recognizes that self-love is the dissolving of the identity of the ego. So it's constantly on the lookout of, is this person about to break free into self-love? If so, I'm going to find a way to sabotage it. I'm going to bring distractions in life to put an end to that. So there's this ongoing tug of war of ego wants us back into self-doubt and self-hate. Higher self wants us back into self-love and self-belief. So we've got to be mindful of that. These are two competing energies that are going on. Beautiful. So let's go a little bit further and let's see what else is some of the habits or accesses to self-love. Now, again in society, and this is a little bit of a spin-off from one of the first things we mentioned, there is this notion of, if I hate something, then that will stop it from reoccurring in my life. Kind of like we used to say to our parents as kids, oh, I hate broccoli or Brussels sprouts, and we would make a big deal of what we hated so it would never appear in our life. Well, we continue that. Many of us have continued that as adults. So we say things like, well, I hated that job, and I hated that relationship, and I hated that marriage, and I hated that experience. And we've got all these, a whole collection of experiences in our life that we have labeled with the energy of hate, in attempt to prevent them from ever happening again. It's like our way of drawing the line in the sand. Yet, life is this unraveling of truth. And the truth is that to carry hate is self-destructive and destructive on a global level. So life is this unraveling of more and more and more love. So when any one of us is holding on to hate or anger or resentment, life, aka a higher self, is going to go, well, that's not very useful. I'm going to help you heal that out of your space. And this is where shifting from one experience into the next becomes available. Because when we hate and we resist and we resent, And when failing to see what the lesson is, what to get out of that experience, where the love is, where the joy was, where the lesson is, then we're going to stay stuck in that experience, whether it's a bad job, a bad relationship. And just leaving that bad job or just leaving that relationship doesn't mean it's going to be healed. You'll just go and create that again and again with different people and different circumstances. So there is this desire from within you, the higher self, to rid yourself of that hate. Because wherever there is that seed of hate, there is going to be the weed that grows from that, which is more and more experiences that are reminiscent of that original experience. More jobs you dislike, more people you dislike, and so on. So this concept of if I hate something and I declare that I hate it, of pushing as if that's going to push things away, is actually, again, that false economy. It's the ego's loop of, yes, let's teach everyone that's what's going to push it away, and the ego knows it's actually going to keep attracting that in. So this is a key access into self-love, is when you reflect back over your life, and there's certain key encounters, frustrations and failures and all these things that you label with hate, you're going to start cultivating an acceptance and ultimately a love for that experience. Now, you don't have to love all these experiences, but to be without hate is the goal. To be clear, to have that space clear, because while there's hate in that space, we're not going to be connected to that ever-present self-love. It's just going to block it. So how do we accept, or even if you're ambitious, love some of these traumatic, horrible, frustrating, annoying experiences that we've all gone through? Well, again, the fast way to do this is through the connection with your higher self, because each one of those experiences has played a vital role in our development, our growth, who we are today. So, as we learn to go through experiences, and this is an exercise we actually do at the beginning of the self-mastery program, is that we actually, with the higher self, with that all-knowing intelligence, we actually backtrack through each year of our life. And we go through, all right, well, what experience did I have a week ago that I'm carrying anger, frustration, hatred about? All right, connect back in, what's the actual truth? Oh, really? Here I was thinking that was a complete and utter disaster. Higher self brings it in and goes, no, this is the truth, this changed this made this possible, you wouldn't be where you are today if that chain of events hadn't happened. So to ally with that higher self and heal, what we call clear, wherever there is hatred, is going to free you up immensely. And this process might take a week, it might take a month, it might take a year. You might want to keep going over it. And once you clear all your years up into today, then in a week's time or a month's time, you might be doing this again. You just keep cleaning up. It's just like you clean up the house. By living in it, there's going to be some more mess that also needs cleaning up. Same with your life. You're going to have experiences that are designed to, shape you, chisel you, evolve you, and ultimately shed the false identity. So they're all on track. And the ego comes in and convinces us that we are lost and off path and not moving forward. But again, the ability to see the truth in that space is an absolute asset. And what's come up to share with everyone is another one of the ego's little tools, and that is busyness. We often find ourselves getting easily distracted from peace and tranquility. Again, beliefs that we need to be busy or we're going to fall behind, we're going to go broke, all these non-truths. So this amazing chain of events happen that the more busy we become, the more of the mind we stay in. And the mind, as we've explored, is filled to the brim of unfulfilling notions, non-truths. But as we ease out of that busyness, mentally and physically, a space starts opening up. And this is one of the most direct routes to self-love, is to create space within oneself, within one's life, to breathe, take deep breaths, to move slowly through the day. And I notice this with many people, and my son does this a lot, is, we go from one activity to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. We get up, breakfast, work, gym, this, da, 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 da. Whereas, start exploring what it's like to stop and pause between each actual experience. Because that creates a gap where the ego really has a hard time penetrating into that. It's very good at accessing that hurried space where we're feeling under pressure. Just comes right in. It's a bridge that it just walks over so easily and so quickly. And before you know it, you're moving faster and faster and feeling more and more under pressure, more behind, and getting more and more exhausted. So to nurture that slow motion through life, not slow motion as in the TV show being slow motion, it's slow motion compared to how many of us normally are. Just moving through very relaxed, as if you're wanting or intending to hold a meditative space throughout the day. And that to me is mastery, is being able to manage that internal space to the point where you are always connected to universal intelligence, to your higher self. And that doesn't come from rushing, that doesn't come from chasing your tail. So the idea is to live in a meditative space, just exist in that space. And it's a very helpful way is obviously to breathe. Remember to breathe and to breathe deeply and to pause between each experience and to sit and enjoy what you're doing. There's some beautiful spaces in your home and where you live, whether it's the garden or a particular place in the house where you just like to eat something or have a cup of tea, but just have that be all you do in that moment. So many people go sit on the toilet and they've got a newspaper or the iPad rather than just being present to what that experience of going to the toilet actually feels like. It's like trying to avoid that. And it sounds funny, but we then carry that into all other experiences. When we're spending time with our children, I see so many parents who go to the playgrounds and instead of being present to the children, parents are on the phone texting, looking up the news. And that is a part of life that they're actually missing out on. They're reading news or listening to gossip and going through ego distractions, missing out on the joy of their children. So the challenge comes up for all of us to look at where can we be more present? Where can we be more focused? Less distracted by the ego. And that's really a key one for everyone on this call. Because in every moment we can create more and more space. And the more space we have within and around us, the more that self-love starts bubbling up. The more we start appreciating who we are, where we're going, where we've been, and the divine intelligence that exists within. So there's so many payoffs for creating that space. It's so worth it.